So I'm here to talk about perceptions that can rock our worlds, wisdom from our spiritual ancestors. What I'd like to do is present a certain wheel of perceptions that can, well, rock our worlds of education, of politics, of religion, of economics. And I'll be calling on some mystics from our various traditions, from Eckhart to Einstein, from Rabbi Heschel to David Bohm, and Thich Nhat Hanh. A mystic is a lover. A mystic is someone who's tasted union and communion, tasted the world of non-dualism and of unity, of love. Mystics, I would say, are masters of non-duality. Meister Eckhart says we should separate ourselves from all two-ness. Separate ourselves from all two-ness. In other words, from all separation. And he says, in breakthrough, I learn that God and I are one. That's one of the separations that we can easily fall into, especially with theism. And that's why I'm not a theist, I'm a panentheist, which says everything is in God and God is in everything. Julian of Norwich in the 15th century, a great mystic, said that between God and the human, there is no between. I like that line a lot. Between God and the human, there is no between. But Meister Eckhart also says this about perception. He says, the divine is present with all the divine bliss and all the angels inside of me, but I do not perceive this. The divine is present with all the angels inside of me, but I do not perceive this. First of all, notice what he's saying, how big we are. We are a receptacle. We are a chalice for all the angels, and there are a lot of angels, and for the divinity as well. Eckhart is explicit. He says the soul is not in the body is in the soul. And that, of course, means that our consciousness, which is probably a better word for soul than soul is today, is very extensive indeed. But what is he saying by saying we have a perception problem? Why don't we perceive this? What's getting in the way? Some Buddhists talk about the need to clean the windshield. We have to clean our windshield to see the world as it really is. We need to get out of the way, to empty, to cease projecting, to go into the dark and get out of the light. And of course, then, to practice, to take on practices that allow us to cleanse our perception so we can see what really is. And of course, we're gifted today because of the shrinking of the globe with many, many practices. Sweat lodges, for example. Many, many meditation practices. Voluntary simplicity. Fasting. Vision quests. Chanting. Mantras. Sun dancing. Going to jail. Yes, going to jail is definitely a spiritual practice where you learn a lot of things that you don't learn in the light of day. Crises and failure and loss. Consider AA. Psychology itself, dealing with the shadow, can be a tremendous help in helping us to cleanse our perception. Despair itself. The dark night of the soul. As I said in a recent panel we had here, I believe our species today is in a collective dark night, a dark night of our species. And it's a very important place to be, because the dark night teaches us things that we do not learn in everyday perception. Hafiz, the great Sufi mystic of the 14th century, said, sometimes God wants to do us a great favor, turn us upside down and shake all the nonsense out. But he said, most everyone I know, when they hear that God is in such a playful, drunken mood, quickly packs their bags and hightails it out of town. That's another way of talking about what we learn from the darkness, what we learn from chaos, what we learn from loss and confusion. The mystics invite us to stick around for the chaos and not to flee from it. And of course, another way to cleanse our perception is through art as meditation. I think often we don't name this bluntly enough. To paint, to do clay, to dance, to do film, photography, all this as process and not just to produce a product, this can truly be meditation. It is a focusing and a profoundly focusing experience. It's a centering experience. So there are many, many ways in which we can learn to cleanse our perceptions. Thich Nhat Hanh puts it this way. He says, the practice of Buddhism has very much to do with the removal of notions. The removal of notions. In Buddhist practice, we aim at liberating ourselves from notions and perceptions, even notions and perceptions about our own happiness. So I wanted to start out by talking about perception is not only between us and other beings, but it's also a matter of cleansing our capacities to see and to recognize. And this has been recognized for eons of time by humans who have been engaged in what I would call spiritual technologies. That is to say, practices that allow us to purify our way of seeing the world. Now I'd like to turn to some examples of perceptions that can rock our worlds. Looking for perceptions that can change and are changing us. The first one I would name is science itself in demonstrating what we mean by perception today. What we are learning is that when we perceive, we create. We are creating a lot of what we perceive. This very perception itself can rock our worlds. Why? Because it underlines the importance of creativity. Creativity is in all of us. And as the very distinguished panel said last night, it's happening in nature constantly. As one scientist said here last night, there's a new creation bubbling up all the time. This is certainly an affirmation of the tradition of continuous creation, that everything is being created constantly, and certainly within our own vast imaginations. To put creativity first is to become a more regular thing than we thought. We're busy being creative every single day. But this is a theme in my book that came out a couple years ago on creativity, that the Italians, I'm happy to say, just translated last month. It's the very definition of anthropologists when they go looking for our ancestors. They look for bipeds with artifacts next to them. That proves that anthropologists know that the working definition of a human being is a biped who makes things, a creative biped. Unfortunately, this has not yet seeped into education. When there's a budget crunch in education, as there is everywhere, of course, out goes the theater department, out goes the music department, out goes art in general. Why is that? Because, of course, we're not holding creativity up as a value. And the result is grave. The result is boredom. The last few years, I've been working with inner city high school kids to try to reinvent education from the inner city out. We call it the AWE Project. AWE standing for awe, but also for ancestral wisdom education. And what I found, 65% of black boys in America today are not graduating from high school. Is that because they're dumb? Or are our structures, our forms dumb and boring? These kids are leaving high school early, and very often the result when education fails them is incarceration. Now, the key to what I've been doing for several years, and with marvelous results, is creativity. We have the kids making films. We have kids making murals and so forth. And the result is we did a survey after our second year, and 100% now wanted to stay in school. Why? Because they discovered the joy of learning. Duh. And the joy of learning comes from the joy of creativity, of discovering that you've got a mind that wants to make things with the rest of the universe. Amen. One day, I was in class with these kids, an 18-year-old black kid, a senior. He turned to me and said, "This is the first time in 4 years of high school that anyone has asked me to express myself creatively." So if we're looking for what's wrong with education, I propose we might begin with this very point about creativity. Now I'm happy to say our director has taken the program this summer to Oaxaca in Mexico. She's been working with indigenous kids there, and to Mexico City, working with gang members, and all kinds of people show up, and many of them accomplished artists in Mexico, loving working with these gang kids, making murals together. And this director of ours is herself Hispanic, Latino, and she learned from her grandmother how to create paint out of cactus. So he teaches these kids that, spray paint is bad for your health, it's also bad for the environment. If we make the paint together out of cactus, everyone's happy. Furthermore, they add moss to the paint, so they actually have living art, literally living art on the walls. And there were 2 newspaper articles in both cities about this project that's going on there. And so, again, let's not underestimate the power of creativity. And this rediscovery is what I call it, a rediscovery from science, about how involved we are in creatively making our world. Just the other day on NPR, I heard Lauren Dennison, a Bay Area playwright. She was being interviewed. She talked about her husband is a scientist. She's a playwright, an artist. She said they talk a lot about what do they have in common. And she says what they have in common is creativity. Because the question is, what if? What if? So her scientist husband asked questions like, what if we mixed up these particular amoeba and so forth to get to this particular disease and so forth. And she, of course, is talking about what if we create a play, I create a play that does this and so forth. But notice again, the coming together of artists and scientists is part of what is released when we perceive anew how involved our creativity is in everything we are about. Now, a second insight that really needs, by the way, I want to point out how Thomas Berry, and the great prophets of our time around ecology and geology, he has an answer, I think a very important answer, to the question that people love to ask about, well, is the universe purposeful? Is the universe random? What is it? Here is his answer. A different interpretation of the data of evolution is now available, he says. We need merely understand that the evolutionary process is neither random nor determined, but creative. It follows a general pattern of all creativity. Well, there is an answer to a major question, And of course, you can think it over and reject it or accept it. But I love it. That there is something between determinism and chance. And that's called creativity. And creativity includes a lot of chaos and a lot of chance. But it gathers it all up and does something significant with it. And of course, what I hear echoed from this is words from Meister Eckhart. He says, all creatures have the capacity for birth. A creature without birth would not exist. God's chief aim is giving birth. The noblest work of God is giving birth. God takes the greatest delight in giving birth. In fact, he says, what does God do all day long? God lies on a maternity bed giving birth. Now, he said that 7 centuries ago, that there is this bias in the universe in favor of birth. And I'm delighted that science is on board for it. Now, another dimension to perception, I think, that is very important comes from Einstein, when he says, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and our rational mind is a faithful servant. But we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Now, no one can accuse Einstein of anti-intellectualism. But this man is telling us we've got an intuitive brain and we've got a rational brain. And in fact, the rational brain should be serving the intuitive brain, and the intuitive brain isn't even in the room. Another word for the intuitive brain is mysticism, our mystical brain, our right brain. And he goes further and he says, values do not come from the intellect. Values come from intuition, he says, and feeling, which really are the same thing, he says, deep feeling, not emotions, feeling. So how much room is there, I ask, in our academic worlds for that intuitive brain? And if we've banished it, as Einstein says we have, that means we've banished values. That we can't come up with the common values that will sustain us as a species and so forth. This powerful medicine that Einstein is talking about. He says, warn people not to make their intellect their God. The intellect knows methods, but it seldom knows values. They come from feeling. It is not intellect, but intuition which advances humanity. Intuition tells people their purpose in this life. Your vocation, your calling comes from intuition. We have to learn to trust it. We have to learn to develop it. We have to learn to honor it. Not to put down the rational or the intellect, but that they dance. We have a sacred marriage. But you can't have a sacred marriage when one of them isn't even in the room. And so we're talking about values. E.F. Schumacher, who of course is rightly famous for his marvelous book, Small is Beautiful, on economics, he also wrote a very deep book on education. And he says the bottom line of education is values. This is what education has always been about. It has been about the elders passing values on to the younger ones. And of course, what I've just suggested is that we're pretty woeful when it comes to values because we've pretty much banished intuition in our versions of education. So I want to throw out a few values that I think are very, very intrinsic to perception. And the first of these is the value called wonder. The value called wonder. I don't know anyone who has written better about this value than Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a giant of a man in terms of scholarship, in terms of spirituality, both mysticism and prophecy. He marched with King in Selma when he received a lot of messages from his Jewish community that he should not do this. There's enough anti-Semitism already, they said, to go around, and now you're stirring up all the Southerners and everything else. But he who had written the major work, a classic work on the prophets, paid no heed to the naysayers, and he did what his conscience told him to do. But I want to show you how important wonder is to his entire value system, because I think it has everything to do with perception, and so does he. He says, well, he quotes Alfred North Whitehead. When you understand all about the sun and all about the atmosphere and all about the rotation of the earth, you may still miss the radiance of the sunset and the glory of the morning sun. So there's a difference between knowledge and excitement. And then Rabbi Heschel comments, the sublime is not the quantitative aspect of nature. It is something qualitative. It is the immense preciousness of being, which is not an object of analysis, but a cause of wonder. If we have banished wonder from our psyches or from our classrooms or from our churches or synagogues, we are in deep trouble. He says, there is a perception of the sublime, which is a perception at the end of perception. So in other words, there's an evolution, there's a gradation in our perceptions. And he feels the climax of perception is the experience of the sublime, the experience of ecstasy, the experience of wonder. He says, to a mind unwarped by intellectual habit, unbiased by what it already knows, to unmitigated innate surprise, there are no axioms, no dogmas, there is only wonder. The realization that the world is too incredible, too meaningful for us. The existence of the world is the most unlikely, the most unbelievable fact. Who could believe it? Who could conceive it? We must learn to overcome the sleek certainty and learn to understand that the existence of the universe is contrary to all reasonable experience. That's part of the triggering of the perception of wonder. The world is not just here, he says, it shocks us into amazement. I felt that last night with the team of scientists up here talking, how they were very much still shocked into amazement with what science is now discovering and pondering about vis-a-vis our world, vis-a-vis our universe. He says, Heschel says, we must keep our own amazement, our own eagerness alive, and avoid the mind's narcissistic tendency to fall in love with its own reflection. We cannot afford to dry up. Souls that are focused do not falter at first sight, falling back on words, ready-made notions with gestures of exultation. To them, all sight is suddenness. Eyes do not discern the flash in the darkness of a thing, perceive but series of cliches. So in other words, we can choose. Are we going to choose to perceive series of cliches? Or are we going to be on the hunt? Be hunter-gatherers for wonder and surprise and ecstasy and breakthroughs. That's a choice. And I dare say, I think in many respects, our culture has made the choice for us a choice of being couch potatoes, a choice of being passive and let other people do their creativity for us, and we just sit and eat more potato chips. Keep the system going. Consumer capitalism. Finally, says Heschel, forfeit your sense of awe. Forfeit your sense of awe. Let your conceit diminish your ability to revere, and the universe becomes a marketplace for you. The whole universe then, instead of being a place of wonder and surprise and awe, becomes simply a marketplace. Everything has its price. So I think what Heschel is telling us about is of great significance. A lot of perception is, what are we looking for? What are we hunting for? For example, Meister Eckhart was once asked one day, they asked him, who is a good person? And his answer was, a good person is one who praises good people. I love that answer. I've been practicing it for about 20 years, since I first read it. It's really interesting. You know why? He's saying a good person is on the hunt for praise, on the hunt for goodness. And when you see it, you're not in competition with it. That awareness does not turn to envy, it turns to praise. It turns to celebration. Heschel also said, praise precedes faith. Praise precedes faith. In other words, you shouldn't have a single dogma lined up in your head until you've learned to praise. The Celts have a marvelous saying. They say, never give a loaded gun to a young man who's not first learned to dance. Because dance is part of praise. And we should not be taking life of any kind until we first learned to praise, where you learn the preciousness of the glory and the beauty and the goodness of life. Another dimension to perception was really wonderfully introduced just now by the fellow who has the black tent out there where you can experience the new cosmos. Cosmology, ecology, a creation story, such as we're getting now from today's science, to add to all our other wonderful creation stories, this itself is part of the explosion of perception that is right on our fingertips today. Again, Rabbi Heschel says, wonder is an act in which the mind confronts the universe. Wonder is an act in which the mind confronts the universe. That's the great mystery of where we are, and the fact that it took 13.8 billion years to get us here is wondrous in itself. And we can't let this moment pass by as if it's not a tremendous spiritual breakthrough to be told this story from science today, which cuts through all ethnicities, nations, and religions. And it's not about throwing out other creation stories. You never have too many creation stories. But this one is special because it is from science and it is universally taught. Moving from a perception of the universe as a machine to perception of the universe as a being, as an organism, which is the nearest analogy we have to the universe because it began smaller than a zygote. Smaller than a zygote. And it's been growing ever since. And it's pretty darn big. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, etc. How can we not pay attention? Now, how do we pay attention? How do we get this perception more fully into our bodies, into our hearts, into our minds, and those of our young ones? Number one is ceremony. Ceremony, ritual. We have forgotten during the modern era how powerful ritual is. The truth is that 96% of our existence on this planet, humans, their educational systems were not in schools with desks and exams and Ritalin if you're not happy sitting in a desk for 7 hours a day. No, that's not what education was. It was ceremonies. And these ceremonies brought out everybody, the elders and the young ones. And they all had work to do to create these ceremonies. What is it that created Stonehenge? I just marvel at Stonehenge as an example. Why? Well, because this was before wheels. They dragged rocks, hundreds of tons heavy, for miles, and putting them on river barges and everything else. Why? What got them out of their couches? It was cosmology, folks. It was about ceremony connecting to the rhythms of the universe. This is what created the pyramids. This is what created Newgrange, that marvelous monument in Ireland. It's older than the pyramids. One day of the year, December 21st, my birthday, I'll say, humbly to you, the sun goes all the way down that shaft. They figured it out. They had a relationship with the universe. And it was huge. It brought everyone alive. Burning Man brings 60,000 crazy people out to the desert every year. Don't underestimate the power of ritual, the power of ceremony. I'm glad that this was brought up during the introduction, that I've been working on this for years. Ever since the Pope fired me, I became an Episcopal priest in order to reinvent worship using with young Anglicans who were doing it in Sheffield, England, from the rave movement. So using dance, VJing, DJing, rap, and all these new art forms of this time in history that are at least as exciting as the revolution of the 12th century of stained glass. That's what this is about. And it's using, here we are in the heart of Silicon Valley, it's using these marvelous inventions from Silicon Valley and beyond for sacred purposes, for awakening perception, for cleansing our perceptions, for gathering community, and for having fun in a serious way. Just a month or two ago, we did a Cosmic Mass. We called this a Cosmic Mass. We did it for 1,000 people at Sounds True Conference in the Rocky Mountains there. And it was amazing. And I asked people when we began what traditions were there. There were Sufis. There were goddess worshippers. There were atheists. There were Buddhists. There were Hindus. There were Christians. There were Jews. In fact, the Jewish rabbi was part of the table prayers. And the response was off the wall, really, off the charts. One woman came up after, she said, I have hated religion for 22 years. I don't go near a church unless I have to go to a funeral. But she said, when we did that grieving ceremony, it got me right here. She said, my heart started to melt. She said, by the time the communion came along, I wanted to participate. She said, my life has changed totally today. I've been transformed in this one experience. Another man from Silicon Valley here came up, and he said that he'd been a Catholic all his life. He agreed with me, the young people aren't in church anymore. But he said, what we did last night, he said, it's the first time in my life I've understood the power of the Catholic Mass. And again, he pointed to his heart. And he said, I really want to support you and see this thing spread. So we can't underestimate the power of ceremony to awaken perception and to sustain it, to make it strong. Thich Nhat Hanh has an amazing passage in his book, Going Home, about the Christian Eucharist, the Last Supper. It's amazing to hear this from a Buddhist because it's better theology than I've ever read from any Christian. So I'm going to share it with you. Not many people want to become priests in our day, he says. That's an understatement. But everyone is hungry. So many people are hungry for spiritual food. There are so many hungry souls. Take, my friends, this is my flesh, this is my blood. Can there be any more drastic language in order to wake you up? Can there be any more drastic language, says Thich Nhat Hanh, in order to wake us up? What could Jesus have said that is better than that? This piece of bread is a body of the whole cosmos. If Christ is a body of God, which he is, then the bread he offers is also the body of the cosmos. Look deeply. You notice the sunshine in the bread, the blue sky in the bread, the cloud and the great earth in the bread. Can you tell me what is not in a piece of bread? The whole cosmos has come together in order to bring to you this piece of bread. You eat it in such a way that you come alive, truly alive. Thich Nhat Hanh gets it, and he's a Buddhist. Once you reset our ceremonies in a cosmic context, which is where they were always intended to be, all hell breaks loose. All beauty breaks loose. Glory breaks loose. Radiance and doxa. Let me just remind you of one ceremony that's meaningful to me from the Lakota tradition. and that is the pipe. Think about what a sacred pipe is, what it's made of. First of all, it's made of wood, of trees, because the pipe itself is wood. It's also made of stone, of rock, because the actual pipe is rock. And the pipe is empty, so it's an honoring of nothingness. And then you put a little tobacco in the pipe, so the plant world is now in the pipe. And then you light the tobacco, and you smoke it, and your breath comes out, and it's visible. It's hard to make your breath visible unless you live in Wisconsin. And out comes the smoke, and the smoke rises to the heavens. And this is your breath that's rising. So just meditate on how rich the imagery is here. They're not just talking about perception. They're doing it with ceremony. The tree people, how important are they? Well, they're the first ones to defy gravity and stand up straight on the earth. Until then, we had just wiggly things in the water. No backbone at all. The trees taught us to stand up and develop a circulatory system that resisted gravity. Bless their souls. The rock people, how important are they? They're the first people. Talk about elders. Of course you want to pray with the rock people. They're the oldest people on the planet. Same thing in a sweat lodge. So what I'm pointing out is that ceremony is always cosmological. Otto Rank, the great psychologist, says that. Microcosm meeting macrocosm. That's what ceremony is about. Well, that's what we need today. It's not enough to sit and hear scientists talk about perception. We have to act. Awareness is not enough. Awareness is not enough. We have to put awareness into practice. And once we know these truths, including the importance of nothingness and emptiness, and we'll get to that in a minute too, then we want to find the ceremonies that bring these alive in our bodies, in our souls, in our memories, in our imaginations, and especially with the young people. In doing our cosmic masses over the years, we've never had one child crying or bored. Children love to dance. You don't need a crying room for children unless your worship is boring and exclusively adult-oriented. Children know all about wonder. So another dimension to cosmology is the darkness of it all. The statistics we were reminded of last night. Dark matter, dark energy, add it all up, and then there's black holes, add it all up, and you're talking about 96% of the matter we know in the universe. Wow, that's a lot of darkness. I'm not a betting man, but if I were, and I bet someone here is, bet on the apophatic divinity. The future of divinity is the apophatic divinity. That's the God of darkness. Eckhart says God is super essential darkness. God is nameless nothingness. God has no name and will never be given a name. So this, of course, is very Buddhist, too, that we should suspend talk about God for a good deal of time. God can become a dumping ground for our projections very, very easily. And so to reverence the darkness that is also divine, or as they said last night, is pure potentiality. That's a wonderful name for divinity, pure potentiality. Here's how Eckhart puts it, and it sounds like pure Buddhism, but to be honest, he never met a Buddha in his life. He says, how should one love God? Love God mindlessly, so that your soul is without mind and free from all mental activities. Your soul should be bare of all mind, should stay there without mind. For if you love God as God is, mind or person or picture, all that must be dropped. How then should you love God? Love God as God is, a not God, a not mind, a not person, a not image, even more as a pure, clear one, separate from all two-ness. We shall sink eternally from something to nothing into this one. Now, what strikes me about this passage is so Buddhist, you never met a Buddhist, which to me proves much of the universal truth of Buddhism. Eckhart got to this same place through his own Christian meditation. Now, a large part of perception is the work of prophets and artists to get us to change our perceptions. So, for example, Martin Luther King was essentially saying segregation can and must be ended. It is a perception that we can do away with. Gandhi was saying the British Empire is a perception we can do away with. And they found methods, nonviolent methods, to bring these actions about and bring them about successfully without sacrificing life. And I think this is true of the prophetic vocation of all of us, that our job is to cleanse our society, not just ourselves, of perceptions. For example, the perception that Wall Street is the only version of economics. You know, are we kidding? There are economists in our time, and one of them is at this conference. I'm thinking of David Korten, too, who, of course, are coming up with alternative visions of what economics can be. These people deserve our support. In conclusion, you might say that one way to turn perception around is this phrase we have: you mean to tell me, Thomas Jefferson, that kings are not divinely ordained? That democracy is an alternative? Do you mean to tell me that original sin is not part and parcel of Jesus' teaching? That original blessing is? Do you mean to tell me that corporations are not people? That Wall Street raping Main Street is not the only form of economics that we're capable of? That interdependence and not rugged individualism are at the heart of the habits of the universe, of our earth systems and all beings? It is this habit of interdependence, which science is now on board with, that is the whole basis of compassion taught around the world. Every religion I've ever studied praises compassion. The Dalai Lama has said we can do away with all religion, but not with compassion. But what is compassion? Compassion is the living out of our interdependence. It's not enough to talk about interdependence. We got to put it into action. It's the living out of joy, shared joy and celebration, and that's what so much ritual and ceremony ought to be. But it's also, of course, our shared grief and shared suffering. And the struggle for justice, the struggle for healing of any kind, then is also working out of our interdependence. And so I just want to conclude by saying, well, I loved last night's presentation. I did disagree with Deepak Chopra about defining spirituality as awareness. Awareness is not enough. I think it's an awareness that leads to action that is spirituality. And the action must come from a deep place, not from a reptilian brain response, but from people who've done their inner work so that reptilian brain is calmed and tranquil. So the mammal brain, which is our compassionate brain, our brain of kinship, can truly step up and come forward, finally. Because look around you, it's clear the reptilian brain is still running things on this planet, and that is why things are being run down. So we all need to learn to meditate. We all need to learn to calm that reptilian brain so that the mammal brain can come forward. And so that our action comes from non-action. And the action comes from non-being even. That it comes from a deep place of silence. From that apophatic consciousness or that apophatic divinity. Where nothingness is real. And where potentiality is everywhere possible. Because it's out of that we all flourish and shine and radiate like the sun itself. Thank you.